No. And welcome everybody to episode whatever number it is. I'm not going to tell you. You can guess. Uh, just because I said it out loud, that's where my brain went. But we are two wizards and a mic, where a couple of old people decide to talk about D&D every single week, and we give you all kinds of wisdom and advice and things, and then you tell us how wrong we are, and we smile back because we're mature old wizards. I am Shane.
And I am Andrew.
And this week, we're going to talk about memorable locations in D&D. However, is there any update on the Kickstarter? Anything on that front?
There is. So the backer kits are out, which means the survey to collect information on all the backers and a chance for people to add more rewards. All of our books, all of the Monster Series books, some of our other Dungeon Master books, and notebooks with our covers on them, the art from Travis, stickers of all the creatures, well, a few of the creatures, um, and a few T-shirts as well. Things that you could add. Our World of Myrr books, a really good deal on all of those. A really good deal actually on all 5 NPC collections that go with these monster books.
Cool.
Um, yeah, so a lot of choices. About half of the people have filled those out already, and the manuscript itself is finished with layout. Gordon's done the first 2 chapters, and Travis did the first chapter as part of the Kickstarter. He already illustrated that. So now I gave him the descriptions for the second chapter. So that's progressing. A cool part is I asked a couple of questions in the Kickstarter this time for the first time. The first question I said is, what would you like to see next from us? Our World of Myrr book, which will have all 9 continents, and we'll update some of the books we already put out. Or do you want to see an adventure right away? Because we're definitely going to be writing adventures. So after about 400 people have voted on Kickstarter, plus the other social media platforms, guess what
Nice.
the vote is after 400, about 400 people have voted?
I would think adventures, but
Well, that's what Travis, the artist, thought too. However,
really?
what the vote is right now is 215 for Mir, 200 for the adventures.
Oh, wow.
Almost
Okay,
exactly
so
50-50.
well, I got to say that I'm happy that people actually want to see an updated book for Mirror because the book that you have already talks about a lot of stuff that hasn't actually or hadn't at the time had not been written as far as I'm aware. So, fleshing out that world is actually not a terrible plan.
Well, and the great part is, we're going to have like over 600 monsters now after the new book. And now we can make a world for you to play with those. And it's going to be made so that you can use the lore and the stories that we've created there, the history. But it's very easy for a DM to go in and put their own stamp on it and to use different areas for what they want to do, which is
Yeah.
how Gygax made World of Greyhawk, which is one of the reasons I like it so much. So yeah, it was very interesting. That's almost exactly 50-50, but the adventure book is, or the world book is a bit ahead of the adventures. The other question we asked is, what level, once we start making adventures, what level would you like? If you divide it up in terms of the 4 different um, areas, like they do with 5th edition. So which do you think? So it's levels 1 to 5, and then 6 to 10, 11 to 15, and then 16 to 20. Which do you think that most people would have voted for?
Well, I would vote myself probably for like 16 to 20, but that's
Mhm.
because a lot of adventures. I mean, if you could play an adventure, and generally by the time you get to 20, you kind of go, okay, it's time for something new.
Right.
Maybe switch out switch out the game master, switch out the locations, all kinds of stuff sort of happens. That's kind of a natural cutting point.
Mhm.
But I mean, there are rules and sort of all kinds of resources out there. But what happens after 20? So,
Yeah,
which should be an episode of this show, come to think of it.
it should be.
But
Yeah.
but that's what my guess, 16 to 20.
Okay, so 60%, at this point, approximately 60% voted for levels 6 to 10.
Really
Yeah,
interesting.
huge percentage. And at the beginning of the vote, it was 80 or 90%. And then the other level, the second place sort of caught up a bit. Second place is levels 1 to 5 with about 30% of the vote. So 90% have voted for levels 1 to 10.
That's, I mean, on one
5%,
hand,
about 5% voted for 11 to 15, and about 5% voted for 16 to 20.
well, I mean, I could understand that because a lot of players, if they're experienced, don't really want to go back to 1 through 5. They would prefer to really get into the meat because it's isn't it level 6 and 7 where a lot of the the special features of certain classes and certain species kind of explode a little. Well, not explode, but you get
Yeah,
some boons and things. Not boons, but essentially you get these traits that become. I don't know. It pushes you in the direction of a little more creative play because you're not so afraid of dying outright. But like, oh, I'm gonna go
yeah,
and get this thing. Oh, you're now dead. Okay, you failed
yeah.
both of your rolls. Get a new character out.
Yeah, that starts to happen a little bit at third, and then fifth level is when you get quite a bit of that. Um, but it is interesting. There's still a third of the people want first level adventures. The majority by far want that, like you say, that crunchy 6 to 10. And it is interesting because this backs up the data that Wizards said that most people don't play past 12th level in the right these days. Um,
Right.
that doesn't include every group because our group definitely plays past 12th level. In fact, I have about 4 main campaigns running right now with 2 groups, and only one of them is below 10th level.
Yeah, I think the campaign we played we're now 18th, if I remember
Yeah,
correctly. So yeah,
yeah. The Greyhawk campaign you're in is 18th level.
yeah.
Yeah,
So I mean, I totally get that people want to get into the, as you call it, which is the best thing I've ever heard described, the crunchies. 6 to 11 levels. Um, well, I mean that's amazing actually that people are all wanting that. So hey, I'm for it. But
well, the interesting thing is actually all of those things are line up with what my creatively what I wanted to do. I mean, I was just as interested in the world book as I was at adventures, and it's 50-50. But if I had to choose, I would probably say the world book, and that's what the vote says so far. And then adventure wise, I thought that most people would be interested in a 6 to 10 first, and my guess would be first to fifth level second. So it's interesting that that's lined up. I think I would like eventually to do those high level adventures, but
yeah,
it'll
yeah.
be later on. I think
I
the
think those
first
are harder to do as well.
they are, yeah. I think the first one we would do, which is most likely beginning of next year, would be 6 to 10, and then we would do at least 2 more next year, and those both I would do first to fifth level. I think. Yeah, I know what all those stories are actually at this point. I know
Right.
what those adventures are going to be. So yeah, I know next year what I'm going to do. So probably the year after that would include another high level one as well.
Well, that's good because I'm excited. I'm actually kind of wondering what the next adventure is going to be myself, but don't tell me yet. Shh.
All right.
All right, so let's talk about some of these memorable locations. Um, you wrote out a list, and I've gone through sort of all the. Actually, I went through a lot of Dragonlance modules over the past little while because I wanted to see because I've played through them, but it was like, God, I want to say it was only 5 years ago. No, it was probably like
Yeah.
30
Yeah.
years ago, and but I mean the main adventure location in all those books was one of my favorites. But let's talk about yours, uh, which starts classic adventures. Is this correct?
Yeah. Well, the first thing I would say is a spoiler alert because we will mention some things that maybe give away a little bit of some of these adventures. We'll say what the adventure is first, just so you can, stop
And
there.
then and then you can go la 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 for
Yeah.
about a minute or two.
But we won't get into really great detail. We're just talking in general terms. And this is to give some inspiration in terms of these adventures. Some people think that a memorable adventure always has to be an epic location and just incredibly stunning. That can be, but it also can be really simple. It depends on the story. And
Yeah.
with your group, it also depends on the dice in the moment. So something
True.
that's really basic could actually turn out to be quite memorable. Although, like Shane said, I mean, for me, a lot of these ones, especially the original ones, it's 40 years ago, more than 40 years ago. So it's hard for me to remember everything. Some of them I will never forget, and some of them I had to sort of, you know, jog my memory a bit. Um, the first one, actually, it's not on the list. I just thought about it. I thought about a few more this afternoon. Would be the first module I ever played in, which was B2 Keep on the Borderland or
Yeah.
Borderlands. The thing I remember about that, the first module I was in, I hadn't played D&D before, was the keep part because I never really thought of a keep as being a settlement in itself. Because the keep in that module, that adventure, has a blacksmith in it. It has a tavern in it. It has like a little chapel with a priest. Um, I never really thought about that a large castle or keep or fortress would be so big that it would have to include some of these elements where it was really like a little village or little town in itself. And I thought that was cool. That's something I never forgot, and it gave me a taste for what a medieval kind of adventure would be like. So I always remember that. Um, Another early one was the village of Hamlet. That one I remember again because it's like a typical sort of medieval village, but the difference with D&D is it has this fantasy element. So there is sort of these dark elements hiding in the background. Like there was somebody in the village who there are some evil characters. Um, there's a wizard's tower. There's a church. There's an inn. There's the moat house nearby, which is ruined. And in the moat house, not only are there monsters, but there's also guards. So all of those things kind of started to give me a feel for what D&D would be like. And it's also that blend of where D&D came from. It came from wargaming, right? From these guys
Yeah.
lining up all these soldiers in these big battles. And then they added in the monster element and they added in the way that you play a character. So those two are really, really ingrained in me. As well, the A to 1 to 4 adventure, the Against the Slave Lords, especially the first one, where you go to these ruins and you go into the sewers and the underground area under this ruin, and there's traps and it's unpredictable. There's insect people, um, and there's evil humanoids. So for me, those were, I think, the first three kind of series that I got involved in. And after that, that was when I decided I want to be a DM. I want to run these games. This is awesome. But as a player, those for me are like all things I won't forget.
I totally agree. The actually, I got to tell you, when we went, I think this was uh not last year, but the year before, we did an adventure where you were using parts of Elemental Evil and um, I've forgotten the other adventure. But anyway, you actually just said, okay, well, where are you guys going to go? You have to
Mhm.
go to this moat house in this village. And as soon as you said the name of the village, my young kid brain was like, oh my God, this is so cool. Because there was all kinds of sort of memories that sort of came to the surface that, I don't think would have ever bubbled up any other way. And
Yeah.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah, and I
that just
think
kind of
some of the
speaks to the
names
quality of
too, like
those
there's a
locations.
character in Hamlet called Rufus, which isn't the first name that would come to mind for me for a medieval sort of setting. But again, it showed like what D&D is about is that there's a bit more spice to it and it's a little bit more there's more going on there and you can add in your own personality and you know yeah, I just thought it was so much fun. Like that was the best part. Like we talk about here with this podcast, it was so much
Exactly.
fun. And if I had to think about one word, especially the Slavers series, that was so much fun going into these dungeons and these little tunnels and um, yeah. And I'm still playing it.
Well, exactly, because you've brought in those elements, and every so often you talk about something that's going on, and my memory goes, "Wait a minute, that sounds really familiar."
Hmm.
And then later on, we find out, oh yeah, no, I was borrowing from this, I was borrowing from that. I just got to merge them together and made this cool idea. And because I think we did like well, actually, let's keep going with the classic series because I was going to bring up
Sure.
some of the newer ones, but yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So the next one I remember, I think this was early on when I was DMing, was the G to 1 to 3 series, the Giants against the Giants series.
Which
So
was
you
the
start
first
out.
adventure I ever played,
Oh,
really.
really? Yeah. So that was pretty early for me too. Like, but I think I was already DMing by then. So the Hill Giants, first you face them, and it's this kind of this big lodge above ground. But just the idea we've mentioned before of like sneaking through this area where you're much smaller than the furniture and the creatures around you, it makes me think immediately of Jack and the Beanstalk, that story,
Yep.
and fairy tales. And then the the frost giant lair in these cold caverns. I thought that was really cool. Just the whole idea of doing a dungeon crawl in a cavern. That was one of the earlier ones that I remember. And then the fire giants was this really intense fight. They were the most powerful, and it's more of a dungeon crawl. And then, spoiler alert, the hidden temple that's
Yeah.
underneath or inside the giants fire giants complex. That was like a big reveal at that time, which was pretty wild.
I'll never forget hiding in the closet because you had
Yeah,
at the very beginning, and I always remember that the closet. I remember some of the like the kitchen and some of those areas where you're not necessarily the right scale for the
right.
the building and stuff and that kind of stuff. I just love that.
Yeah, that I think that whole series is fantastic. So many things to remember. Like I said, that especially that temple for me at the end. Um, and then there's a secret which I won't reveal further. However, the next series is the D1 to 4, which is really my favorite. The
Yep.
first part of it probably is the most memorable in terms of, again, caverns going into the underground and what the underworld would be like, the underdark, fungi growth, and not only were there evil humanoids down there, but you're talking about there's even a lich. You just like there's one small like one small text block, and it just only about that big. And by the way, there's a lich like on this shelf just resting here. Um, so yeah, I like that one, and the whole world of the underworld. And then I remember outside the Drow city, there's this big outpost called the Black Tower, manned by a whole bunch of Drow, and I thought that was really cool because that made sense, right? If they had a big capital city, they would probably have these outposts, these areas guarding the city before you got there,
Yeah.
and a place for the Drow to venture out into the rest of the underworld. And there's warehouses nearby, and then it gets into the whole idea of these different clans, these different houses, these noble families and families of how, and the Drow, and there's actually rivalry between them. I love it. Which again goes against this idea that the Drow are neutral evil. There's no way they're neutral evil. They're definitely chaotic evil, because they have infighting amongst themselves on a regular basis. And yeah, and the city's chaotic. There's mind flayers wandering around, giant spiders walking down the street, demons just strolling along. So the whole Drow world I just loved, and it's still my favorite adventure. And that's really the inspiration for our Underworld book, our Monsters of the Underworld.
Well, there's also for me, just speaking of the Underdark, the Queen of Demon Web Pits, which was like Q1 through whatever.
Hmm.
Although the numbering is a bit different at that point.
I think
But
it's just Q1.
yeah, Q and the big. Well, I always thought of it as large when I was a kid playing the game, but there was the basically the dungeon looked like a spider, like it was laid out in that kind of
Yeah.
sort of thing, and that was iconic. And it's, I mean, the fact that I haven't forgotten it to me just kind of speaks like um, one of the one you have on your list next. That to me is ingrained in my brain. And there's like four, sort of areas that really, that I'm so excited. Would you like to talk about the next one?
Right. Yeah. So White Plume Mountain, another classic adventure. For me, probably the one with the different, we mentioned this in a previous show, the one with the different layers, levels, where there's
Yeah,
water and there's different creatures on different level. It's like one giant chamber. That's the one that
yeah,
stands out the most for that one for White Plume Mountain. Oh, maybe that's the one with the Sphinx too. Yeah, the Sphinx too.
yeah. I was just gonna say the Sphinx
Yeah.
with its place where it lives. Um, yeah, like there's so many things there. Like there was also the White Plume had one of the
Oh, those magic items, of course.
well, of course you have to
Yeah,
have those.
yeah.
Well, yeah, iconic. I I want to talk more about it, but keep going in your list.
All right, yeah. And then the next one, another classic, The Tomb of Horrors, which we've mentioned. Of course, it's hard to ever forget that big demonic face,
Yeah,
which, it's a great example for a first edition where, if you wander through that, there's no saving throw, there's no nothing. If you go through that face, your player's just annihilated.
yeah.
Why would you do that? Well, there you go.
Here you
um,
are. Welcome to death.
yeah, and a really memorable thing about that module is that it's one of the first ones, one of the only ones that has images for the dungeon master to show the players, including that demonic face. So I really liked that aspect of it, and I liked. I'm pretty sure there's the. Is that does it have the trap with the chained platforms, or is that White Plume Mountain?
That's White Plume Mountain.
Yeah,
Um, because there's also those weird levitating White Plume Mountain tunnels of water that you
right,
can
right,
swim through.
right,
But the trap that I'm thinking of and always remember in Tomb of Horrors was the one that just kind of drops, and then the players have to stop from sliding into a pit of spikes or whatever was at the other end.
right,
But
right.
essentially, it's like
The whole
suddenly the whole
floor
floor just
tips.
goes thunk,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's
like
a
things
really
like
good one.
that. I mean that I mean, from what I understand in reading the historical sort of stuff, is that that particular one that was a tournament one, so the
Yeah,
traps were very ingenious, um, and were basically meant to kill off players. That's what they were trying to do.
yeah. It was
So
made to challenge a high level party as much as possible and very likely kill them. So the feeling of that is like that, funhouse kind of feeling, which is in White Plume Mountain to a certain degree too.
mhm.
And it was fun. It reminded a lot of players back then of Dragon's Lair, the video game.
Yep.
And at the beginning, especially, Dragon's Lair was so hard when you go to try to play it in the arcade. It was similar to Tomb of Horrors. I don't know which came first. Probably Tomb of Horrors, actually. I think that was written in,
Yeah,
I
I would
think it
go with
was in the
that. Yeah,
70s. I think it was a few of these were written in the mid or late 70s. Like you
and then
say,
republished
for,
later on. Yeah,
yeah. Another classic, the really big module at the time, which came out later, kind of in the mid 80s, is Temple of Elemental Evil. That version of it, anyway. So there's kind of an endless amount of things to talk about. There are some really cool ways that you can move around the temple. There's this, I always remember this elf paladin who's being kept in sort of suspended animation and kept prisoner. And he has a really powerful sword. And so the players have a chance to rescue him. If they do that, it's a really big bonus. Having a really powerful paladin in the party can't hurt. And he lasted for a long time, when you went through Elemental Evil a couple of years ago, that NPC lasted for quite a while. That was Prince Thrommel.
Yeah. He didn't. Did he actually? Did he just leave at one point, or did he actually
No,
die? Did he
no,
die?
he died. Yeah, he got killed by um, a powerful creature in the Tsojocanth adventure, Lost Caverns
Okay.
of Tsojocanth. Um, yeah, but Elemental Evil, I definitely remember. Yeah, many, many layers. It's a mega dungeon. I remember the prince who was sleeping. Um, that one I also remember very clearly about all the wandering monsters and patrols because these cults are running the temple. So, yeah, it was a very, very challenging place for the players to be because all these creatures would show up all the time and interrupt them.
I kind
Do
of
you
like
play
that
that?
about a lot of these ones. Is that there's definitely that particular adventure is hard, but with those elements to them, it doesn't make it any harder. It makes it challenging. Do you kind of think like there's a difficulty, but it's a challenge rather than being just this is too hard. It just becomes what am I trying to say? Like
Yeah,
you get jazzed, you get excited to
it's not as deadly as Tomb of Horrors straight out, but
yeah.
it is still a really big challenge because there's so many enemies. I think it's much easier to play it with fifth edition characters because you have more resources, more healing. But first edition, yeah, was a major challenge. I'm sure, yeah, it wasn't as hard as Tomb of Horrors, but it was pretty tough.
And
Yeah,
you have some gorgeous copies of it as well. Like some those you were showing those books off for like what a couple weekends ago, and yeah, there's so
yeah.
much to
The version that came out in the mid '80s was the biggest module that had ever come out. Beautiful art, and you can get a really good print from Drive Through RPG still of that module. Another one I won't forget. I think I played this. I think actually I was a player in this too. Was the U1? So this series U1 to 3 was actually done by the UK arm of the TSR group. It was the first. I think it was the first adventures they ever did. They also did the Fiend Folio. It was like their UK branch. That it was
yeah.
kind of a much later on in TSR's history in terms of coming from the 70s in the US. So I always loved Sinister Secret of Saltmarsh. Saltmarsh itself is a great little fishing village, some interesting characters. I don't really like what the fifth edition did it to it. It doesn't make any sense. You know, they're trying to be politically correct by having all the female characters do, different jobs. Like, of course, the blacksmith's a female character, and they throw in a female tiefling for no reason, which doesn't make any sense. But the original one was cool. I think that's a really great setting to have this little seaport. And then the best part about it for me was this haunted house just outside of the town.
Yeah.
Um, and it was basically a dungeon crawl in a house, and it hides a secret. And there are things like the floorboards give out. You find a person who's tied up in there, and you have to find out who this person is. Yeah, I think it was a really good combination of a dungeon crawl, classic fantasy, and then there's a mystery involved as well.
Yeah, the house is probably the location that I like the most. I think I died there more recently.
Oh, that's
one
right.
of my
You
one of my
actually died in
characters.
the garden. That's right.
You got killed by a rose bush.
Yeah, I think you died outside the house before they went inside.
Yeah.
Yeah, but then there's a ship. Again, spoiler alert. The ship is pretty cool, and then later the swamp, which you had another character die. Oh no, was that no? That was when you died.
Did I
It
die in
was
the
the
swamp?
swamp with the
Okay.
crocodile.
I've totally forgotten now. I mean, it's been a
I
while.
don't think you couldn't have lost two characters before third level. No, I
No,
think it was the
I just
swamp.
lost the one. Yeah.
Yeah, it was the swamp. So it wasn't long after the house. Like in terms of game time, might have been the next day. Yeah.
Also, the probably another location in that particular adventure for me is the one down the coast, which you basically just you have to go to at some point,
Right.
where you first run into, basically a lot of aquatic kind of creatures and things like
Right.
that, which gives that flavor to the salt marsh adventures. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, I
Yeah,
gotta
I
say,
think the whole series, you're right, is really good. Three very different adventures, in the series. My favorite still is the first one with that house. Um, yeah, so those are some examples of some things we remember and we barely remember from the original adventures. And then some memorable ones from our World of Myrr. So we've been doing that for almost, I think it's 8 years. So it's about 9 years I've had World of Myrr with three different groups. And most of the things I remember are with the West of the Wood group, some before Shane joined and then some after. Before you, I remember the one I really remember well is when the players get captured, they get betrayed, and their drinks get drugged, and they are kidnapped. And the next thing they know, they wake up and they're in jail cells in a dungeon. They fight their way out. They don't have anything other than, luckily I think they had a sorcerer. They had a sorcerer, so he doesn't actually need a spell book. So he can still do magic, and they fought their way out. I usually do if I do decide the players might get captured or they get captured, I usually have this thing where most of their items are in a chest nearby. So if they find a way to break out, they can, get their stuff back. Because otherwise they're going to get wiped out quickly. And that's what they do in Skyrim too. If you break out of the jail, your stuff's in a chest nearby. Have you
yeah,
ever done that in Skyrim? Escape from jail, get all your stuff back and taken off?
yeah, I
Yeah.
have, yeah,
So
and
I
then
try to set that up, and that's what these guys did. Then they found out not only were they in a dungeon in a jail, they were underneath a manor, and the manor was an island, and the island was in the middle of nowhere. So I just love that shot, just like, dun 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 dun.
well, it also forces the players to really think about how to get out of it. Like, where are we, and how do we leave, and what do we need to do to get out of here, or do we
Yeah.
just take over? Uh,
Well, and it's also like, oh, great, we finally got out of the cell. And then it's like, oh, okay,
yeah.
great, we finally defeated the jail guards who happen to be pirates. And then it's like, oh, finally we got upstairs. Oh, there's more pirates in the manor. Okay, we finally defeated them. So now we get outside. Oh, we're on an island in the middle of nowhere. Okay, how are we going to get back? And there was no ship. The original time I ran it, there was no ship there, I think. So at the beginning, they're like, what are we going to do? Like, are we going to swim? Like, yeah,
Oh
so I
my
remember
gosh.
that for sure. Another part of that adventure would be the catacombs under the city of Wild. So that, I tried to make that a little bit like the Slave Lord series where there's evil humanoids down there, there's monsters, there's oozes, there's rats, and make it really unpredictable. And I think we had a lot of fun with that. And that's real classic dungeon crawling.
Nice.
They ended up hating that evil group of this little gang that they dealt with for months and months and months, which was pretty much my goal. Um, then another one I won't forget is there's a huge abandoned fortress in the World of Mir in the mountains, and it's being overrun by goblins. So it's sort of like if you imagine the goblin caves in the Hobbit movie, in the first one. Was that the first movie? Yeah, in the first movie. That's sort of what it's like inside this fortress. But but the remnants of the fortress are still there. Quite a bit of it has been abandoned, so monsters have moved in. I had a zombie beholder in there, which was fun. So that was
Nice.
fun too because the players at first were like, "Oh my god, there's a beholder." When they found out it was a zombie beholder, they were like, "Oh, it's not going to be too bad." And then when they fought it, they were like, "Oh, this." I also remember too, unfortunately, that was the first time I ever ran a group where a player left another player's character basically to die. And there was some hard feelings.
Wow.
They were in a fight. Uh, their two characters were badly hurt. They were fighting a lot of goblins, and he just took off through the nearest door to catch up with the rest of the party and left a dying party member alone.
Wow.
Yeah.
So
Um,
glad that was before my time playing in Mir.
well, what I had to decide really quickly, I don't usually do something like this, but I thought it would be really unfair for that player's character to die in this way. I mean, if it happened twice, maybe I wouldn't do anything, even though I wondered if that player was going to be in the group for that much longer at that point, which actually ended up happening. They didn't stick around for that much longer. But what I did in that case, I had in the story, I had this group of dwarves who were nearby in this fortress and they were lost and they were trying to get out as well. So I decided to introduce them at that moment and have them rush into this room and find the fallen party member and drag him out and then meet up with the rest of the party because I thought it was so unfair that he'd had no. I mean, at least you can try to help the fallen person. Like, you could try to drag them out of the room or at least get them, behind a door.
Anything, but just
Yeah,
be like, peace out. I'm gone. See you later.
pretty much. Pretty much. Yeah.
Oh, man.
Um, Another one I remember well is the town of Blodden in the World of Myrr, which is a very gothic city and sort of has a Ravenloft vibe about it, undead, and it's this combination of a city where things look really good, the aristocrats are dressed very nicely, there's a beautiful castle, beautiful homes, but there's this like seedy underbelly and darkness around every corner. Um, I like that one quite a bit. Um, Another one which you mentioned, which was when you arrived with the group, which was the Southern Territories, and I decided we were going to have a survival campaign. So, in other words, it was going to be very hard for the party to find very much gold.
Right.
It was going to be very hard for the party to find very many magic items. It was a very barren area. There wasn't much farmland. There weren't many people living there. And you guys started out as smugglers, just trying to eke out a living. And you had a sea cave as your headquarters, and you were part of a crew. Uh, and that one I really liked. I love the idea again of that cliff, which is similar to the Sinister Secret of Saltmarsh adventure, where there's a cliff and you can involve ships coming into a beach, and then it can be near a settlement. Um, yeah, I always like that sort of setting. Yeah, the combination of having like sea adventures and caves, and then a little seaside port. There's so many different characters and creatures that you can get involved.
True. True. I mean, those creatures that I mean, I keep picking out Saltmarsh about being how awesome it is, but yeah, I mean that just made me think about it. So, I mean, the fact that you and I still remember these adventures from so long ago. I mean, it's hard to really pin on like one location that's
Mhm.
iconic in those. I mean, well, the exception of the house. Okay, that I admit. But once you've moved on from locations, because sometimes in a session you might visit three different locations.
Yeah.
Um, usually not many more than that, before you really get into the meat of what the adventure is trying to, what the goal overall is.
Mhm.
But um, the cathedral in Knox, I mean, that to me in is the Knox was a place where when I first started playing with the group, we were down in the south for the longest time. Then we switched to a new adventure, and we
Mhm.
were in the north. And
Mhm.
then we were basically running around Knox for quite some
Mhm.
time. It was basically a
Yes.
city adventure.
Yes.
So, and then of course, what happened to that was the adventure that thing happened to the cathedral at that time, where everyone kind of was shocked at what had occurred.
Yeah. So yeah, Knox is a big city in the city of or on the continent of Mir, and it is quite chaotic. This wizard council runs it, but they don't really care day to day what's going on. So it's a real disaster, chaotic and very crowded. And so it just so happened that the party were going to a wedding. They were invited to a wedding of their friend, um, in this big castle that had a cathedral, and that was where the wedding was going to be. And oh no, actually no, I'm remembering incorrectly. It wasn't their friend had already got married recently. It was actually a wedding between two evil characters, one who they'd been hunting for years. She caused them. She was the one actually who drugged their drinks, and that's why they ended up captured by the pirates. So they were actually they were really trying to hope to have a chance to take care of her once and for all. And she was getting married to an anti-paladin lord. Somehow they got into this wedding. About half of the wedding were their friends and allies, and half of the wedding were more evil characters. And it was quiet and peaceful for a while. And then all you know what broke out between the two
Yep.
groups, the evil and good factions. And things were bad and chaotic, and it was this wild fight, really high level characters. And then the I think you're 20th level even at this point. We might have had two sets of characters there that night too. I can't.
I
Yeah.
think
Anyway,
so.
you were about 20th
There
level or
was,
close to 20th level, and your
yeah,
sorcerer decides to cast Meteor Swarm in the cathedral. And he brings down the cathedral. He wipes out like half of the enemy. But also, when the cathedral came down, it ended up killing one of your friend's wives.
yep,
Um,
which
what
caused a big, huge issue.
Yeah, your closest NPC for years who'd been with the party. His wife was killed in this, and the cathedral was destroyed. The person that you'd hoped to eliminate somehow escaped one more time. I think her husband, her groom, I think the groom might have died, but that was spectacular. I mean, you could just imagine a cathedral with a meteor swarm spell. There's glass raining down, stone raining down. Yeah, that was epic. The last one I remember really well, it wasn't from very long ago. Another town on a cliff. You can tell I like these. And I remember it partly because it was one of the times I'd use the most terrain for the setup.
Right.
And there was just so much going on. There was a ship behind the cliff with this big manor on the cliff. There were there was a tavern, stables, some manors down in the town, and the party had arrived because one of the characters' families lived there and actually ran the town, but she'd found out they were completely evil and was going to confront them. And yeah, it was almost as epic as the meteor swarm spell because there was, creatures conjured in, a salad showed up, bodyguards were fighting, vampires appeared. It was amazing.
You have a thing for slads.
I do. I do. Actually,
They
the
are a
funny thing
terrifying and
about
quiet creature.
that, well, they're amazing. They're an awesome creature. They're incredibly deadly. They pack a surprise. Um, I love also that when I'm writing about slads, that autocorrect immediately changes it every time to salad,
You'll be fighting a
which is
salad today.
it's not quite as dangerous.
Well, you know, there are some terrifying salads out there.
There
Yeah.
are, but a salad with a great sword is not nearly as dangerous. Yeah.
I hear new creature. A salad with a sword. I seem to recall after opening up a book recently of a series that I like, that there was I think it was from the city, the Flying Feast or whatever it was called, but the feast
Oh,
of
yeah,
things,
yeah, yeah,
which is terrifying in its own right.
yeah, yeah. It reminds me of a podcast I was on a couple years ago where we were talking about monsters, and they said they had some suggestions. And the first one they threw out was a dunk skunk.
Dunk skunk.
They're sure yeah, they were like, I'm sure this makes sense to you. Maybe you could have that in your book. Yeah.
Well, you know, there's always future books to put things like that into. Completely
Yeah, I don't
ridiculous
think
creatures from all over the planes of existence.
well, the one thing if when we do adventures is we're not going to stop making monsters. So our plan is that adventures will be 30 pages of the story, 10 pages of NPCs, 10 pages of monsters, and then 10 pages of maps and extras like tables and things. So Travis would still have some art in the story, and then he would do illustrations of 10 NPCs or so, and then around 10 monsters. So, we could have some more creatures in the future.
Excellent. Well, that is the end of the list, boys and girls. We have talked about all kinds of different classic adventures and some newer ones. Uh, we even there's and you could talk about this kind of stuff all the time because there are so many, like, we didn't get into like the different levels of like yawning portal and things like that where there are all kinds of crazy things that you could get into.
Mhm.
Uh, but the reality is that all of these locations are just about giving you, and I always say it, giving you flavor of what the adventure is about, but also at the same time, uh, as Andrew was saying very early on, giving you inspiration to be able to create your own. And even if you have a location that you decide, you know what, I could create a better one or a different one, uh, that is the whole point. You want to be able to take people through adventures that are not always the same, because that's one problem with adventures that have been written for the past 30 years is that they either get rewritten or ignored, and you could rediscover them, or you could just say, you know what, I've played that one 100 times. It's time to make a new one. It's never time to not ever play it again, but make a new one, because why not? That's the way the D&D is. That's the way creativity is. So blah 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 blah. Uh, any final words for future things coming up on the show or in the Kickstarter? Delivery date is December-ish for the latest book, but
Yeah, it's likely going to be earlier. Depends how fast Travis can do the art. I mean, it's possible it could be October, November. The other thing I should mention is that pre-orders are open, so people who missed the Kickstarter, they can now go in and they can come into the Kickstarter through the pre-order, and there's a lot of good deals on the pre-order page. And then as far as these, again, these memorable locations, people forget too that it also happens. It has to do with who's at the table at the time and what happens. So
true,
the dice are going to make things memorable, how they end up rolling, and also a lot of people who write adventures or write for D&D seem to always uh, forget about the players. Everybody has their own imagination that they bring to the table
true,
and they bring to the adventure. So that's always part of it. It's not just the DM, reading the description or leading you in. A big part of it too is the players having a personal experience on their side, and they bring a lot to the table as well, literally to the table.
exactly. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. I mean, that actually made me just think of when you're playing in these adventures and you have those people at the table, um, the DM can change anything. They could look at the page, they could see what's going on, but as you were saying, but those people bringing their talents to the table, you already know that, oh, well, they like to do that, they like to do that, they like to do that. All right, you know what? We don't need to have creature X in this room. It's now going to be a fall away floor, or a la like Goonies or something.
Hmm.
And that yeah, the and that makes a location completely different, totally memorable, and it may never ever get written down because I've been in so many locations in D&D. I couldn't tell you where it was, just whatever the DM's imagination was at the time, and after the adventure's done, it just goes off, and you only have the people at the table that have it in their minds of what they experienced. And uh,
Yeah.
anyway, this game is cool. And by the way, this game is just a game, but also is brought to you by Cawood Publishing at worldofmere.com. So thank you, Andrew. And we will see you next time here on Two Wizards and a Mic. Don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to tell people about the show. Everything will be down below. And yeah, and also this will be an audio version. Don't forget about that one. Um, we have lots of people on there who like to, listen. So yeah. All right. Bye, everybody.
Later.